Hi there, I'm Chris Knowles. I'm making the puzzle game Hexahedra, and this is the first Hexahedra devlog, where I'm going to talk about what's happened to the game in the first 6 months of production. Since this is the first video, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what the game is about, using a stop motion video I made a while ago using some of the concept art. Now you may have already seen this. If you want to skip over it, there are some time index links in the description, but if you're still with me, here we go. Hexahedra is a puzzle game all about optimization. You take charge of designing and programming a factory that produces cubes, which are the galaxy's most important commodity. You'll need to place devices into a series of workstations to repaint cubes, replace panels with different materials, and even add payloads. But the challenge isn't just to ship the correct cubes, but to do so in the most efficient way possible. What is the quickest you can get the factory to run? What's the solution with the fewest devices or fewest commands? Hexahedra will allow you to compete with others for the best solutions across several categories. To help with efficiency, some devices allow you to examine your cube so the factory can react to their state. The weigher allows logic branching based on cube mass, and the laser branches based on colour. The laser can even measure cubes in other workstations, so one part of the factory can influence another. As you move from factory to factory, you might get hints that something is wrong in the world of cube production. There's a conspiracy afoot, and your skills in factory design will make you just the person needed to foil it. Thanks, Octavius. So, after 6 months, where are we? Well, before I get into specifics, let me share with you the most fun aspect of making a puzzle game, and that is learning to play your own game. You implement a new mechanic, you give it a go in the editor, and you realise, oh, this interacts with some other bit of the game in a way I hadn't even expected. I'm going to have to learn how to cope with this as a player. So let me show you the first one of these, which will actually give you a feel for the game as well. So, your factory might have a few workstations, and those workstations will start with a single command track each that allows you to program it. Now when you run the factory, it just runs through those commands and loops back to the start. But you can add extra command tracks to each workstation, and you can move between tracks with devices like the laser. So maybe I want to send cubes with blue tops to the right and cubes without blue tops downwards. And now, as the workstations process their commands, the first pass through here, everything stays in sync. But the second time round, because the first workstation changes tracks, it takes one extra step to loop back to the start. So the workstations start to get out of step with each other, and if I'm not careful, the first workstation will end up so far behind that by the time it sent cubes to the other workstations, some of the steps those workstations need to do have been missed. I end up shipping the wrong cube. Now, I hadn't anticipated that this would happen until I saw it in action, but it's exactly the kind of thing I was hoping to see, where the relatively simple tools the game gives you combine to produce interesting effects. So, back to progress. The original prototype I made for Hexahedra last year was a very basic thing with just a few untextured square panels and some developer art UI. Nothing exciting, but it did convince me that the concept was worth turning into a full game. Once I was done with the prototype, I could see all the ways I'd approached things wrong in the code the first time round, so when I started on the game properly, I threw away most of the code and structured things differently. Since then, I've done a lot of coding, but I've also commissioned batches of concept art, and I've commissioned a 3D modeler to build and texture and animate the devices, and a VFX artist to provide things like lasers and teleportation effects. And that's all arrived now for the first factory type. The design for Hexahedra includes 19 different devices, some of which will be needed on every level. So the shipper is the device that sends a completed cube to a customer, for example, but some will be less commonly used, so the cooler will only be needed in levels where special payloads need to be kept chilled. 15 of the devices have been implemented in code, and 13 of them are working in the Unity client, although some of the animations and VFX do still need adding. So we can add cubes and ship them to customers, we can paint them different colours and we can clean paint off them, we can take panels off and put new ones on, we can heat them up and cool them down, we can repair damaged faces, and we can even dent them if we want to. We can add payloads, although right now the payloads are just big blue spheres, and we can also teleport cubes to a buffer as a way of moving them back somewhere else later. There's some very cool VFX for that I haven't integrated yet, but I am very much looking forward to doing that job. And of course, we can fire lasers at them to check what colour they are, and there are coloured panels we can use to intercept a laser beam if they haven't hit a cube first. So visually, Hexahedra has really come along in the last few weeks. Probably the most interesting feature that's been added so far are these lasers that I've shown you before, because they let you branch the logic of the factory based on the cube state. Laser beams just carry on until they hit something, and that means that the state of a cube in one workstation can influence what another workstation does. But even at this stage, you can do interesting things with the workstation flow with the laser. So for example, I can decide to loop around 2 commands over and over again until I see a cube of the right colour. One big change to the way I structure the code compared to the prototype is for a feature I'm very much looking forward to adding in the future, and that is for a back-end server which will track stats for the different puzzles. So I want to be able to track for each one, the fastest solution, the solution with the fewest devices or the fewest commands, and so on. And also I want to be able to gather aggregated stats of best performances, so I can show you on a graph kind of where you lie compared to other people. Now, in order to make that possible, I need to be able to verify solutions on this back-end server. I want to be able to verify them as quickly as possible, so I've structured the code in such a way that the very core logic of the puzzle, the real core simulation, is in one pure C# project, and that just builds down to a DLL, and I can take that DLL and I can drop it either into the Unity client, where you actually play the game, or I can later drop it to a back-end server. And that means the Unity client itself really is just there to gather your input as a player and then to display the results to you, to show you the state of your factory, how it's set up, and also how it then runs. So if you've been watching me develop the game on Twitch, you'll have seen me flip between 2 projects, one of which is called HexSim, which is the core logic that produces the DLL, and Hexahedra, which is the Unity client itself. The other advantage of this split is that the HexSim code is completely disentangled from Unity, which makes it very, very easy to unit test. And I've written a few hundred tests that allow me to have a high degree of confidence that the core logic of the game does do what it's supposed to, what I think it does, and that is very useful for testing. And if you've seen me on stream, you'll have seen these tests have been very useful, either because they've outright found bugs, I've written something wrong, or just the fact that writing those tests has forced me to think about the structure of the code and then go back and re-engineer things. So I do recommend, if you're building a game, do unit tests, and in the long run it will improve your code and save you time. There are some unit tests on the Unity side as well. Unity has a pretty good system actually for writing tests that let you check code that normally would only run when the client itself was running, such as the update loop. So what is coming up next? Well, there are still a few devices to implement, like the Weigher, which is another logic branching device. So the laser lets you branch based on cube color, and the Weigher lets you do it based on cube mass. So not all cubes will weigh the same, either because they won't have all of their sides present, or because those sides might be made of different materials, and those materials will have different weights. There are also some additional commands I want to add to let you do more advanced programming techniques within the factories. So for example, being able to tell a workstation to wait until a cube arrives, or being able to reverse the direction of a command track at runtime. I also want to get ready to start playtesting with you guys. So right now, the Unity client in the editor just loads up one puzzle from a text file. You do that and you're done. So I need to move to a point where the game lets you play through a series of levels in order and introduce mechanics as time goes on. And once that's done, I'll be ready to start asking for playtesters to give me feedback, which is very exciting. If you're keen for that, I hope you are, the best thing to do is to sign up for the mailing list. Again, there's a link for that in the description. That's the first place I'll be asking for volunteers when I get to that point. So that's the state of Hexahedra at the moment. If you want to keep up with the development, do subscribe to the channel. All the devlogs will go here. There's also the mailing list I mentioned. I have a Discord server. There are lots of links at the bottom. Go and check those out. There's a link to my Twitch there. As I've said, I'm live streaming the development of the game as I go. So if you want to watch this get made live, and if you want to come and ask me game dev questions or anything like that, do check that out. But I'm very excited about the prospect of sharing the game with you soon in an early form. I hope you're keen to play it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.